Okay, hi U.S. history students, Mr. Rosenleaf here. We are going to talk today, and this will be a little bit of review for 4th period, because they got through Battle of the Little Bighorn, but 7th period didn't, so 4th period, just hang tight. Honestly, it should be a review for all of you because you studied this in far more depth in your Montana history class last year, and hopefully you didn't forget everything you learned there. So let's kind of jump in here to the Battle of the Bighorn, and we're going to talk about Wounded Knee, and then we're going to talk about the decimation of the bison herds and the boarding school policy, all of which greatly impacted Native American tribes, particularly in the West. Okay, so this obviously is George Armstrong Custer. Custer had been battlefield promoted to general during the Civil War, but by the time he meets his end at Little Bighorn, he was colonel. He was known during the Civil War for these very dangerous, almost suicidal missions that he would end up coming out of along with most of his men. Even though he was not the greatest soldier in the world, he graduated actually last in his class at West Point when he went through the military academy. But at Little Bighorn, he was after particularly the Sioux, trying to subdue the Sioux Nation, and also the Northern Cheyenne and several other tribes. And so he had a couple hundred guys under him. He had broken off from his main unit. He was part of the 7th Cavalry. And so he had a couple hundred men with him. And his Native American scouts, we don't know if they said, yeah, go ahead and attack, or if they gave him an accurate count and he thought he could just handle it. But the combined tribes that were there had several thousand men against his about 700, and the result was an absolute slaughter. Most of the so the 7th Cavalry's 12 of their 12 companies, 5 of them were completely wiped out. Custer died, as did 2 of his brothers, a nephew, and a brother-in-law. So this cut a wide swath through the Custer family. Total U.S. casualty count was 268 dead and 55 injured, and several of the injured ended up dying within a few days of their wounds suffered in the battle. Supposedly, Custer's last words were, "Hurrah, boys, we've got them. We'll finish them up and then go home to our station." And then he died. So, yeah, Custer did not come out of this very well. If you ever get to visit, and I should have thrown up pictures of the Custer battlefield, there is a memorial for all of the U.S. soldiers who died there, and Custer was one of those. But Custer and the officers ended up being dug up and moved to various cemeteries around the country. Custer is actually at West Point. If you ever visit West Point, his grave is there. But the rest of the sort of rank and file men that died there are still they were dug up and moved to a mass grave, which is where this kind of obelisk-looking thing is. And then a few years later, actually just recently, they built a memorial for the Native Americans that died in that battle. And it's actually a beautiful kind of walk-through memorial. So if you ever get the opportunity to go to Little Bighorn Battlefield, go early in the day. It gets very hot in the summers, and that's probably when you're going, is in the summer. And they close promptly at, I believe it's 5. My bus rolled up about 4:50, and we got about 10 minutes in the visitor center, and then the rangers, sort of tapping their watches the whole time, let us go up to the memorial, both memorials, but they were kind of tapping their watches the whole time, going, "Okay, we want to get out of here." But I was with a group of teachers, so they were nice. So just a piece of artwork, sort of showing Custer very heroically with both of his sidearms. Okay, so after this, this was obviously a black eye for the U.S. military, and a couple years later, the U.S. military will get its revenge in a very not so nice way, and that is what's known as the massacre at Wounded Knee. Here's a remembrance of the event from the medicine man for the Oglala Lakota Nation, Black Elk. "When I look back now from this high hill of my old age, I can still see the butchered women and children lying heaped and scattered all along the crooked gulch as plain as when I saw them with eyes young. And I can see that something else died there in the bloody mud and was buried in the blizzard. A people's dream died there. It was a beautiful dream. The nation's hope is broken and scattered. There is no center any longer, and the sacred tree is dead." And again, that's Black Elk, the Oglala Lakota medicine man, who was there. This. So here they're rolling the dead into a mass grave. So this massacre happened, and then just after it, there was this massive snowstorm. And so they didn't get to clean up the battlefield for several days, and you notice the very crisp line on the mass grave. That's because most of that ground was frozen. Here's another remembrance, and I will later on show you one from a soldier. But this is from American Horse, the chief of the Oglala Sioux. There was a woman with an infant in her arms who was killed as she almost touched the flag of truce. A mother was shot down with her infant. A child, not knowing that its mother was dead, was still nursing. The women, as they were fleeing with their babies, were killed together, shot right through, and after most all of them had been killed, a cry was made that all those who were not killed or wounded should come forth, and they would be safe. Little boys came out of their places of refuge, and as soon as they came in sight, a number of soldiers surrounded them and butchered them there. According to the Native Americans who were there, and actually the soldiers as well, the soldiers were not behaving in a manner that was really commensurate with what we think of as the honorable tradition of the U.S. military. This is a very famous picture. The gentleman's name is Spotted Elk, and he died, and his body was frozen there. Again, the snowstorm hit just after the battle. Now, this is from a member of the 7th Cavalry who was there. His name was Hugh McGinnis. And he said, "Helpless children and women with babies in their arms had been chased as far as 2 miles from the original scene of encounter and cut down without mercy by the troopers. Judging by the slaughter on the battlefield, it was suggested that the soldiers simply went berserk, for who could explain such a merciless disregard for life? As I see it, the battle was more or less a matter of spontaneous combustion sparked by mutual distrust." So again, this is a picture after the battle. Obviously, there were no battlefield actual pictures of this. We just didn't have that technology at this point. But you can see the bodies that are, again, frozen because, again, snowstorm right after this, and you can see the snow. And this from Philip Sheridan was not there, but he was asked to comment on what had happened, and Sheridan, who was one of the most famous generals in the West, said the following: "If a village is attacked and women and children killed, the responsibility is not with the soldiers, but with the people whose crimes necessitated the attack." There's no evidence that the mostly women and children who died at Wounded Knee had committed crimes except being Native American in the West on land that the government wanted. Okay, so in addition to killing Native Americans very directly, the government also set about a policy to take away Native Americans' primary food source, their means of making tools and weapons, and pretty much everything they needed to survive. And that was killing off the American bison, also known as the American buffalo. So these animals that you see here, that you know well as the mascot of the school across the river, these animals had numbered in the millions on the plains at the beginning of the 1800s, let alone the 1700s, 1600s. I mean, these animals were everywhere on the plains from Canada through the continental United States. And after the Civil War, the government is going to decide to try and contain Native Americans to reservations in a means of basically corralling them and hoping that they would just adopt the sort of European American ways of life and either become part of the American society or be put in a corner where they're not going to bother anybody. And really, either one was fine with the government. So this policy is tidily summed up by another major general in the West, Colonel Richard Irving Dodge, who says, "Kill every buffalo you can. Every buffalo dead is an Indian gone." So this is, again, a policy of the U.S. government, particularly of the Army was left to carry it out, but the government is going to contract with lots and lots of hunters, including even Native American tribes. The Apache kill hundreds of thousands of bison during this time in the southwestern part of the United States. But if you ever get the opportunity, there is an exhibit in the basement of the C.M. Russell Museum all about this. And they have a picture such as this one, but they have it at life-size scale. And you can kind of look up and see, I mean, even just kind of sort of a hint of what this must have looked like. So overhunting was a major part of this, the major part of this, but also these were drought years, and so already you had bison that were starving simply because there was not enough grass to go around. But this was fully sanctioned by the U.S. Army. They were the arm of which this policy was carried out. The federal government promoted bison hunting. They wanted ranchers to be able to range their cattle without competition from a wandering herd that didn't pay attention to fences. Bison basically went wherever they wanted. They could derail a train. If a train hit one or two bison, the train would at least be stopped, if not completely derailed, if it was going at high enough speed. So, and again, weaken the North American Indian, the Native American, by removing their primary food source and really their source of practically everything that they did their traditional way of life with. And that meant pressuring them onto reservations where they would be reliant upon the U.S. government for food and supplies and basically everything, because their traditional way of life was taken away from them. This was government policy. This was what the government wanted, was for them to become reliant. So I people will often say, well, why do the tribes need government health care and all of this stuff? And the answer is that the government wanted this at the time and signed treaties to that effect. Yeah. Philip Sheridan, again, Major General in the West, talking about bison hunters. These men have done more to settle the vexed Indian question than the entire regular army has done in the last 30 years. They are destroying the Indians' commissary. Commissary is like a general store. Send them powder and lead, if you will, but for the sake of a lasting peace, let them kill, skin, and sell until the buffalo is exterminated. Then your prairies can be covered with speckled cattle and the festive cowboy, who follows the hunter as the second forerunner of an advanced civilization. I mean, that pretty much says it all, doesn't it? Sheridan actually... I think it was 1874 or so, or no, it was a few years before that. The Texas legislature was considering outlawing bison poaching on Indian lands in Texas. Sheridan goes down to Texas and personally testifies in the legislature against the bill. And not only did they defeat the bill, they write a new bill actually rewarding hunters that would go onto tribal lands and hunt bison. They would be given a medal with a dead bison on one side and a picture of a sad Native American on the other. That's the kind of pull Sheridan had. He was a widely respected figure amongst, certainly European American descendants in the West, not so much amongst the Native American population. But by 1874, there were those poaching on Indian lands had killed 4 million bison, and Sheridan was like, "Woohoo! You go, boy." The hunting of these animals was easy. Here's a big sort of put together pile of just bison skulls. But the hunting of these animals, it's not like they ran away. If done well, you could drop a bison and not have the rest of the herd really know it. These were big herds, and if you spooked them, they would stampede. But for the most part, they tried to avoid that. One shot would bring down a single bison if you shot them in the lungs. So Sheridan, saying the quiet part out loud, "The only good Indians I ever saw were dead." This is the basis for the phrase, "the only good Indian is a dead Indian," which is often attributed to Sheridan. This is the actual quote, but same general idea. So here's another, it's like a wall of bison skulls. This is one of the reasons why Charlie Russell's signature was the bison skull. There were so many of them in the West at this point because of the overhunting of these animals. As mentioned in the video yesterday that you watched, the Smithsonian had trouble finding 25 good specimens by the end of the century of the American bison. It's estimated there were about 1,000 in the entire country. They were very near extinction. These are the one part that was sold were the robes, the bison hides, and the government would pay handsomely for the bison hides, but the rest of the animal was left to rot in open fields. Essentially, this is from Colorado, but you can see just the skulls and the bones, and the meat was left to be devoured by vultures and stuff like that. So they weren't even really using the meat; it was the hides. The skulls were maybe somewhat valuable. If you could skin the whole animal with the skull and the head attached, that was. They have one of those in the Great Falls High field house. Why they have a dead version of their mascot hanging in the field house, I've never understood, and I went to high school there. But yeah, so giant piles of bones in North Dakota. This is from out of Canada. Canada did the same things we did, just later on, and usually more gruesomely. So just some other images of this. So in addition to taking away Native American food source, the government's also going to try and take away Native American land, and that was the Dawes Act of 1887. So under the Dawes Act, this is also known as the General Allotment Act, or the Dawes Severalty Act. It authorized the U.S. government to survey the Native American tribal lands, and so the reservations, and divide it into allotments for individual Native American families. And if you accepted those allotments and you lived separately from the tribe as a whole, you would be granted U.S. citizenship. Now, what they would do, though, is so every family got this plot of land, and whatever was left over was seen as excess because the tribe was no longer important to the government. And so they would just allow these other lands to be sold. And it didn't matter that they had been negotiated to be tribal lands. White settlers, European American settlers, could come into those lands and basically live right next door to Native Americans because those lands were quote-unquote excess. Yeah, so this was basically taking away tribal lands, trying to weaken the tribes so that Native Americans would have no choice but to really try to assimilate into white culture. And then in addition to taking away their lands, the final part of this, they're going to try and take away their children. And so this was the boarding school policy. And this basically was eventually, so they started out with boarding schools near the reservations. And what they discovered was that the students were escaping and going back home, and they weren't really assimilating. So eventually what they started doing was building these schools far, far away from reservations. The most extreme example was the Carlisle School in Pennsylvania. So they would ship Native American children as young as like 6-7 years old, ship them off to the east, and they would be taught European American history. They would be taught English. Basically all of the things you would be taught in school as a white child, and not taught their native language or anything like that. And that was meant to basically take away their culture, their future, within their culture, and take away the future of the tribes, so that when these students got out of these schools at, I think it was 21 at that point, they had no link to their culture. They were essentially white, though with dark skin, was the idea. So Colonel Richard Pratt, who ran the Carlisle School, said the following: "A great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one." Remember the quote from earlier. And that high sanction of his destruction has been an enormous factor in promoting Indian massacres. In a sense, I agree with the sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him, and save the man. So again, he's saying the quiet part out loud here, that they are taking away essentially what makes these peoples unique, and trying to make them essentially white with dark skin. So here is a map of where these these schools were. And again, the Carlisle School in Pennsylvania is the one that was sort of furthest away and probably the most extreme example. Pratt ran an absolute horror show of a school. But yeah, here are some of these children dressed. I mean, they're dressed as, white students maybe would be dressed at the time. Button-down shirts, the collars, the hairstyles, the whole bit. One of the things that many of these tribes valued was their long hair, their braid, and that would be cut off almost immediately when they arrived at these schools. Sort of like you go into boot camp and they shave your head. Very similar here. They would be given white hairstyles. Not just boys, girls were forced to these schools, and in the girls' schools, they were taught to do basically manual labor, internal manual labor, laundry, cooking, cleaning, etc., so that they could be servants to white households, was the idea. And this was out of Oregon. That Chemawa school, I think it was. And here's a recollection of one of those schools. 2 of our girls ran away, but they got caught. The matrons of the school, tied their legs up, tied their hands behind their backs, put them in the middle of the hallway so that if they fell asleep or something, the matron would hear them and she'd get out there and whip them and make them stand up again. And this, I found this on the internet. I must learn about the birds and rocks and the trees from books instead of daily interaction with them. This is what the white man says I must do, and I have no choice but to obey. And here, Sheridan, wrap it up. We took away their country and their means of support, broke up their mode of living, their habits of life, introduced disease and decay among them, and it was for this and against this that they made war. Could anyone expect less? Then why wonder at Indian difficulties? And when he says introduced decay among them, they're talking about whiskey. That did a great deal, and we didn't really talk about it. But the introduction of alcohol into those tribes was devastating. So anyway, we are going to stop there for today. I appreciate your time and attention. I will have a couple other things for you to watch, short things. And make sure that just for a reflection today, just write about a couple of things that you learned from this and how this made you feel. Again, and I'm not setting out to make anybody feel badly about this, or that because I'm white, I should feel horrible about this. This is history. This happened a long time ago. But, how did you have any reaction to this? What was it? So that's your reflection. Please put that in a new reflection document. We'll start a new one for this unit. So please make a new reflection document. Do not turn that in. We will do that through the end of our unit here. Okay? Thanks, guys. I appreciate you. All right. See you tomorrow.